Hi, everyone. My name is Danae Joseph, and I'm the National Entrepreneurship Manager at Immigrants Rising. And I'm proud and honored to be amongst the first to welcome you all to our webinar today, in which we've entitled Preparing for Change, How a New Administration Will Impact DACA Recipients. And this was done in collaboration with Immigrants Rising, Path to Papers, Cornell Law School, and the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area. And in addition to being dragged into this for work purposes, of course, I kid because my boss, as well as the former executive director of Immigrants Rising, is here. This isn't just about politics, it's about actually being able to have a personal interaction with this issue. And for me, I'm a DACA recipient from Belize, Central America. I was born in Belize and immigrated here at the age of 7 years old. So not only am I a part of the DACA population, I'm a part of the 11.5 million undocumented immigrants that call this nation home. I'm also a part of the 619,000 undocumented and Black immigrants that call this country home. And in wake of an upcoming election in which so much is at stake, it's not about politics for us. We are being impacted. Our families are being impacted. And we've seen so much in regard to the hostilities, the xenophobia, the blatant anti-Blackness, like we just saw in which a story was made up about Haitian migrants and them eating cats and dogs out of Springfield, Ohio. And one of the things that we always say when we have a movement or a protest or a rally on behalf of immigration, the chant is, when immigrants are under attack, what do we do? And the response is, we stand up and we fight back. And that's what this webinar is about today. We are not simply going to be on the receiving end of hatred and xenophobia. We are going to fight back and we're going to stand for members of our immigrant community. And the way that we do that is by fighting misinformation with truth. The way that we do that is by showing up for community and allowing our communities to know that we are not alone in our fight. And more importantly, the way that we do that is by practicing something called each one, teach one. We don't want you all to simply attend this webinar to be able to tell your friends and colleagues that I went to a Path to Papers Cornell Law School webinar. We want you to be able to take the information in which you've learned and pass it on to the next person. The whole purpose of our existence and our legacy is to be able to say that we impacted the next generation that came after us and make sure that their path, their journey is easier than the fight and the obstacles that we had to take on. So I look forward to everything that you all have to learn from my colleagues, and I'm honored to introduce my next colleague, which is Myra Badagan O'Brien, who is our mental health senior coordinator. Thank you so much. Myra?
Oh, thank you so much, Danae, for such a powerful introduction to this space. And as Danae said, my name is Mayra Barragan O'Brien. I am formerly undocumented, and I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I am here to encourage you to ground yourself while you listen to today's conversation. I understand that for some people, the information itself is grounding, and we want to just get to it. And being asked, just breathe, can be triggering. So in the next 3 minutes, I'm only asking for 3 minutes, I'm going to invite you to practice one of these three things. Number one, take the next 3 minutes and go warm up your coffee, go get your favorite drink, grab a blanket or an object that makes you feel grounded. You know yourself best, and we're gonna ask you to please take care of yourself. Number two, if you can quickly grab a piece of paper and something to write with, or maybe you can use your notes to type the next question so that as you are listening to this conversation, you can reflect on the following. During times of uncertainty, when everything feels out of control, what are some of the things that are within my control? Is it showing up to this place? Is it calling a friend? What is within my control? When I feel trapped, where can I find those nuggets of freedom? Is it by going to visit a friend? Is it by choosing the book that I want to read. And when I feel like I have no choice, how can I remind myself of those instances in which I do have a choice? I'm going to post a question here in case that anybody wants to remind yourself as we go through the presentation, just reminding myself, where do I have choice when I often feel that I have none? And then for the next minute, for if anybody finds it useful to tap into your breathing in order to regulate it, knowing that there's a connection between your breath and your body reactions, I'm going to ask you to just take 1 minute and follow this with me. If you can, use your thumbs, do what I'm doing here, and open up your arms in a form of a butterfly and put it on your chest. And just for a moment, breathe in however it feels comfortable for you, and breathe out at the same time that you're tapping slow, gentle taps on your chest. If this feels uncomfortable, you're welcome to place them on your shoulders or your arms in a position where it feels comfortable, and tap slowly. Remind yourself that in this moment, just in this moment, you're here and you're safe. It was your choice to be here. And we can just take one collective breath. Throughout this meeting, I'm going to be asking you to just remind yourself of continuing to do this when you're feeling that your heart is racing, that your breath is going too fast, that maybe you're sweating, that you're feeling a sense of not feeling safe at the moment as you're getting this information. Just remind yourself of that. And so now I'm going to pass it on so that you can get all that information that you came here to receive.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Jin. It is such a joy to be in the house with Myra and Danae. As many of you know, I had the privilege of being part of the Immigrants Rising team for over 17 years. And yes, it continues to bring such joy and makes me cry to be part of, to see you guys. So thank you so much for all that you do. I'm here today as the founding director of a new entity called the Legalization Project, which mobilizes support, resources, and expertise for undocumented and documented immigrants seeking permanent legal status in the U.S. The Legalization Project is the lead partner of the Bay Area DACA Initiative, which is a multi-year, multifaceted initiative that aims to legalize at least 40% of the estimated 20,000 DACA recipients here in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I'm excited today to be able to pull together various partners from that initiative to talk about a national issue, and that is how a new administration could impact the status of DACA recipients and their possibilities to pursue permanent legal status. We have a packed agenda, so I'm going to ask Stefania to give a glance of that agenda. We are going to begin with a general overview of the impact that a new administration we will have a new administration on DACA recipients. We'll then go into the specific impacts that we might see on family and humanitarian-based petitions, then the specific impact we could see on employment-based options. We'll then go into support as DACA recipients are thinking about, anticipating, preparing for these potential changes. So that support that Immigrants Rising can offer and is aware of. We'll close out with some next steps about how you guys can stay connected to the organizations that you're hearing from, a recap of resources that have been shared, and then we'll end with how we close, with Danae giving us a sort of send out and what to keep in mind as we leave here. We have amazing presenters from, as you've heard, Immigrants Rising, Danae and Myra from Immigrants Rising. I myself am here. And then we have Steve and Krishna from Cornell Law School, specifically the new Path to Papers entity at Cornell Law School. Catherine Seitz, who is at the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area, who will be talking about family-based and humanitarian options. And then Rocio will be sharing resources from Immigrants Rising. So amazing packed agenda, amazing folks here today. So first I'm going to turn it over to Steve Villar, who is at Cornell Law School, and he is a senior attorney. Well, Steve has many titles, but one of his title is a senior attorney on the Cornell Law School Path to Papers team. And Steve, I want to ask you to talk to us generally about what kind of an impact a new administration could make on DACA recipients.
Sure, glad to be here from beautiful upstate New York, even though it's rainy today. And yeah, any new administration is going to bring change, and that's always true for immigration. And the goal of this webinar is to prepare for change no matter who the next president is. So if we go to the next slide, we all know that DACA is under threat. Go on to the next slide. It's under threat either because Donald Trump may become the next president, and in his first administration, he tried to terminate DACA unsuccessfully, and or the US Supreme Court may strike down DACA as being unlawful because it exceeds any president's authority to have that kind of mass administrative program. So the question is, what can we do to understand what the threat is and where it is and when change may happen? So if we go to the next slide, let's talk first about the litigation. So Trump tried to terminate the DACA program, and there was a rule that came out that threatened the program and tried to terminate it. And pro-immigrant advocates sued, saying that the way the Trump administration tried to terminate the program was improper. It did not follow the proper procedures. And in June of 2020, the US Supreme Court agreed with them and said, yes, the termination was done procedurally inaccurately. But it was a very narrow decision. They did not rule on the merits of the DACA program itself. They remanded the case back down to the federal district court in Texas for determination of whether the program substantively could go forward. And so the district court in Texas did find the program substantively illegal, first in a July 2021 decision, and then later in a September 2023 decision. The court did not end the DACA program, however. It stayed the effective date of its order terminating it so that the immigrants' rights community could appeal the district court decision to the Federal Court of Appeals in the Fifth Circuit. So if we go to the next slide, we see that the program is currently in the intermediate appeals court known as the Fifth Circuit. Oral argument has not been scheduled in that case yet. And we do not know when the Fifth Circuit is likely to rule on the case. But be assured that no matter who wins at the Fifth Circuit level, the losing side will appeal to the United States Supreme Court. Given the time frame at the US Supreme Court generally for cases, the earliest that the US Supreme Court might rule that the DACA program is illegal or legal would be June of 2025. Even that is probably unrealistic. It could be after that. If we do go to the next slide, what happens if the Supreme Court does terminate the DACA program? Well, there are a lot of options. We don't really know what they're going to do. The narrowest ruling would say that, well, maybe the president can defer deportation for DACA recipients, but that the president exceeded his or her authority by granting also work permits. So they could slice the program, but at least people would not be at immediate risk of deportation. But terminating work permits would be pretty severe. A more intermediate ruling would be that the program is terminated, but that existing DACA recipients could keep their status until their individual status expires, but they would not be allowed to renew it. And the broadest ruling would be that the program is terminated and that it is terminated immediately. Given what the Supreme Court said before on the procedural aspects of the program and reliance interests of current DACA recipients, I think that last option is pretty unlikely. If we go to the next slide, let's talk about what an administration could do apart from whatever the Supreme Court might do. If Trump is elected again, he would have many options. He could issue an executive order that would immediately terminate the program. He could go through the rule-making process like he did in 2019 and try to terminate the program that way. Or he could say that the current DACA recipients can keep their status until it expires, but no one can renew, and the program would eventually die that way. Whatever President Trump tries to do, if he is elected president again, would be challenged in court. So I don't think you need to worry that something is going to happen immediately. Let's go to the next slide and talk about what might happen if Kamala Harris is elected president. She has many options. She may decide to not make any changes to the existing program, meaning that there are no new DACA applications, but that current DACA recipients can continue to renew their status. Alternatively, she could try to expand the DACA program. She could also try to persuade Congress to enact legislation to put DACA recipients on a path to green cards. A lot will depend on who controls the House of Representatives and the Senate in that case. Again, no matter what President Harris tries to do, conservative states are likely to challenge those actions in court, and so nothing may happen immediately. So let's talk about the next slide in terms of where are we now. So the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services is treating DACA renewals for applicants whose previous grant of DACA expired more than a year ago as initial applications, and they are not processing them because of the court orders involved. So if you don't want to let your DACA status expire, you should renew your DACA status as early as you can. And given the threat to the DACA program, either from a new Trump administration or the Supreme Court, you definitely want to make sure you keep your DACA status and in proper status. With that, let me turn it over to Catherine Seitz, and she can talk about the impact on family and humanitarian-based petitions. Catherine?
Thank you, Steve. I just wanted to interject briefly to say that this recording or this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording and the slides after the webinar is over. So don't worry about capturing all these details. You'll get them later.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Seitz. I'm the legal director with the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area, and we're a nonprofit immigration legal services organization, and we have 7 offices all around the San Francisco Bay Area. And at the end of my slides, I'll show a list of our offices with the phone numbers so that you can contact us if you want to get a consultation or get help renewing your DACA or any other immigration legal services you might need. And you can also go to our website, which is www.iibayarea.org. And next slide. I'm gonna, oops, one more back. That was 2 slides. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to talk about the impact of a change of administration on family and humanitarian-based petitions. So first I'll define when I'm talking about affirmative cases versus removal cases, what I'm talking about, and then kind of compare, you know, what a Trump 2.0 versus a Harris 1.0 would look like in different ways, and then talk about ways to prepare or react. So next slide. So in immigration law, we often talk about affirmative cases versus removal defense. Like, for example, at IIBA, we do primarily affirmative cases with a little bit of removal defense. So affirmative cases are sort of like naturalization. You know, if you're a permanent resident becoming a U.S. citizen, or family-based petitions. We do a lot of those. Or U visa applicants for for survivors of violent crime, or T visa applications for survivors of trafficking, Violence Against Women Act petitions for survivors of domestic violence, DACA renewals, DACA advanced parole applications, temporary protected status, and advanced parole for TPS holders also. So that's all sort of in the affirmative realm. And then in the removal realm is more what's happening at the border, and asylum law, and and detention and immigration court things. What's happening in immigration court, or access to immigration court, is what I'm talking about when I talk about removal. So next slide. So with affirmative cases, sort of Trump versus Harris, what we saw last time with Trump for affirmative cases was we saw a lot of slowing down of the process, right? A lot of gumming up of the works. So slower processing times, more requests for evidence, just sort of obstacles in the way of people trying to get status. Then we also saw the issuance of a notice to appear, or which is also a referral to immigration court, if an affirmative case was denied. Like, so say, for example, you applied for a U visa because you were a victim of crime, and it was denied. Normally, nothing happens. You just go back to being undocumented. You never get that work permit. Whereas under the first Trump administration, we saw that they were referring people to immigration court. So everything became sort of higher risk and more stressful. We also saw the attempt to terminate TPS designations, like even longstanding ones like El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. We saw some restrictive policies designed to result in more denials, like the public charge rule that added more requirements to be able to get past the public charge ground of inadmissibility and show that you wouldn't be a public charge. And then we also saw threats of denaturalization. So even people who already were U.S. citizens, we saw or heard talk of them trying to sort of reopen those cases and denaturalize people, which is up to in the past had been sort of reserved for former Nazis or really egregious human rights violators who had somehow lied about being a Nazi or helping the Nazis. And so then had lost their citizenship that way. So it's a very rare and specific thing. And the threat was to kind of use it more broadly. Next slide. And then in the Harris administration, I expect that we would see a continuation of sort of a Biden-like approach, right? With attempts to do good things with using executive orders like the parole in place program, which was sadly enjoined, but and then I think they will, they'll try to address the backlog, just like Biden has been trying to do. Like a lot of things still take a really long time, but naturalization, for example, we've been seeing 3 to 6 months for a citizenship applicant to get approved or interviewed and approved. And then with family-based cases, we've been seeing sort of somewhat randomly, some of them still take 2 years, but some get approved in 6 months. So we've been seeing under Biden a speeding up of some of the processes. And so I think we would continue to see that under a Harris administration. Unfortunately, I think if there was, I think that we'll also see a continuation of some of the states like Texas and other states who are anti-immigrant would continue to bring litigation to stop executive orders like the parole in place program, like the spousal parole in place program. All right, next slide. And then in terms of sort of asylum, removal, defense, border issues, I think what we saw before with Trump and what we would probably see again is, an attempt to close the border, maybe reinstatement of the Remain in Mexico policy, where asylum seekers had to wait out their cases, wait for their hearing in Mexico, and where they were really vulnerable to cartels and other folks that wanted to harm them. And then we also saw certification of immigration cases at the precedent level, at the Board of Immigration levels, to the Attorney General, sort of very much politicizing the Board of Immigration Appeals, and changing immigration law and asylum law to narrow it and to limit it, to make it so that it was harder to win a case based on domestic violence or family membership or fear of gangs. So we would probably see that again. We would probably see the end of the parole programs and the use of CBP-1 to allow people to enter lawfully. We would probably see the end of prosecutorial discretion, because that happened sort of last time. Like, we had prosecutorial discretion under Obama, lost it under Trump, and then got it back under Biden. And that's where, if somebody's in removal proceedings, the government can decide, look, you're not a priority. You don't have any criminal history. You haven't entered recently. So we're going to just let you just close your case. If you think you're not going to win your case, we're going to let you close it. And so you can just stay here and, you know, contribute to society and not have to get deported. And then finally, the sort of fear of, or the threat that Trump is making is a threat of sort of mass raids again. And I'll talk about that again with, when I talk about solutions and preparations. So next slide. And under Harris, unfortunately, I think we will see not a great situation at the border. I think that she has said, like in the debate, that she would sign the border bill, which was not a good bill. And so I think it will, just like Biden is making it harder to seek asylum at the border, I think Harris would probably continue that, not nearly to the extent of Trump. And then also Biden and Harris, I think, both couple it with these parole programs, right? With the use of the CBP-1 app, where you can make an appointment to be screened by CBP to enter to seek asylum, or you can file for one of the country-specific parole programs where you can just come straight from your country of origin or a neighboring country into the US to seek asylum. I think also under Harris, we would see a continuation of prosecutorial discretion. So in order to address the issue of the backlogs in immigration court, we would see her administration continue to allow people to close out their case if they don't have any criminal history and are just living their lives here. Next slide. And then in terms of ways to sort of prepare or react, especially if there's a if Trump wins in November, I think we have to think about litigation. I think that's what got us through last time. I know we were constantly sort of frantically preparing for some new change coming, some bad thing coming, and then at the last minute, there would be an injunction because of litigation. So that was always super helpful. We really appreciated all the litigators that were out there helping with this. And so like this time, for example, we at IIBA are considering, how can we help with litigation? We're thinking about, could we try to recruit clients to be class action plaintiffs, or could we be an organizational plaintiff in a lawsuit? So we're trying to think about how we can help in the litigation front. Another way to prepare and react is to bring back know your rights trainings. I mean, we still do them, but it's I think it's going to be even more important to educate everybody about their rights. The Immigrant Legal Resource Center has these red cards that we can distribute to people, where on one side it reminds people that they have the right to remain silent, the right not to open their door, and that's in Spanish. And on the other side, in English, it has a little note to the ICE agent that you can slide it under the door saying, I don't want to talk to you, please go away, and I'm going to exercise my rights. Back in the early 2000s, I worked in San Rafael, California, in Marin County, and we saw large-scale raids where ICE would turn up with buses to come take people, because there was a large, for various reasons, there was a large population of people who had outstanding removal orders. And so it was sort of the fugitive operations section of ICE that was coming to pick up people. But people move, right? And so they would go into these apartment buildings and they wouldn't find the person they're looking for, but they would just take anybody they found, and they would take tons of people. And after that, we as a community in Marin County really did a lot of know your rights education, distributed a lot of red cards, and encouraged people to keep their door closed if ICE came back. And next time ICE came back, people did keep their door closed, and there was many, many fewer people detained. So it really can work. to educate people about keeping their door closed. And then between November and January, if there is you know, a Trump win in November, if somebody's immigration case was only administratively closed instead of dismissed or terminated, it's sort of a technical distinction, but administratively closed means that it can easily be recalendared, and we saw that under the last Trump administration, that they were actually reopening people's cases. So we would advise people, if you had only just closed your case, you might want to actually get it fully dismissed before January. Next slide. So please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like a consult. These are all of our offices all around the Bay Area. You can go to our website, and most of our offices have an option where you can just click and make an appointment online. And then you also can feel free to call us and make an appointment. We do have sort of a little bit of a backlog. Like, if you call us today, your appointment probably won't be for 2 or 3 months. So call soon. And we do help with DACA renewals and DACA advanced parole, and with consultations to see how we can get people who have DACA onto a different path, a more permanent path, maybe through a family member or through a U visa. So now I'll hand it over to Krishna and Steve.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining today. I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Krishna Avila, and I'm a staff attorney with Cornell Law School's Path to Papers. In this next section, I'll be speaking on the possible impacts on employment-based work visas. What is that? Basically, generally speaking, employers can sponsor their employees to obtain work visas. So next slide. So luckily, like many of what Catherine mentioned, when we look at employment-based work visas, these are written in law. So this means that Congress passed them, the president signed them. So in terms of them existing or not, they're going to exist regardless of which president we have next. So that includes, as you can see on your screen, green cards, lawful permanent residency, or non-immigrant visas, which are temporary visas that could eventually lead to a green card. Before I go into how the different administrations might impact these options, I just wanted to give a general overview of what these are. So next slide, please. So when we're looking at green cards, just generally speaking, I wanted to let folks know that there are ways where your educational degree doesn't matter. So anyone, regardless of skills or educational degree, could be eligible for a green card. So a green card where an employer sponsors you in order for you to obtain that. The most important requirement for these kind of options is that an employer has to obtain what's called a labor certification, otherwise known as PERM. And that basically just means that the employer is doing advertisement for the job position, and has to show the government that no other U.S. worker is able, willing, qualified, and available for that specific position. And once the employer receives that labor certification, then they can move on to sponsor an employee for a green card. Next slide. H-1B, so now I'm moving on to a non-immigrant visa, temporary visa. The most common one for this population, meaning DACA recipients and undocumented persons, is an H-1B. So for this, you do need at least a bachelor's degree or its equivalent. And more importantly, the job that you have and the field in which your job is in generally has to require that specific degree. So for example, the most common example is someone who graduates with a bachelor's degree in chemistry, and now they're trying to become a chemist. That would be a good H-1B. As you can see on your screen, typically for-profit companies have to enter a lottery before they can even try to apply for an employee to obtain an H-1B. And that's because there's a limited amount of H-1Bs that the government can give out each year. But colleges, universities, and certain government and nonprofits are exempt from this lottery. So that means that these entities can skip the lottery, and if a person is eligible for an H-1B, they can apply right away. Next slide, please. So many of you know that the Biden administration a few months ago released a new policy. That policy, well, he announced two different policies. One of them was around parole in place, which we won't get into. But the second one is about what's called a D3 waiver. So for folks that are pursuing an H-1B, sometimes in order to actually receive their H-1B visa, they have to obtain what's called a D3 waiver. I won't go into who is eligible or who needs to receive that waiver in this presentation, but just so you know, the Biden administration made that process a lot more easy for a lot of folks. So he made a change where basically persons who have a degree from a UN institution of higher education and are coming to work in the U.S. Using that degree to be more easily granted these waivers. Not only that, he also said that these same folks that waiver should be granted expeditiously, so that folks don't have to wait in order to get that waiver and ultimately receive their H-1B or any other temporary visa. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what a different administration could look like. And as I mentioned earlier, luckily these are written into law, so like H-1Bs won't go away. I mean, unless Congress decides to do that, but that's not going to happen, like most likely. So what will happen, likely based on the previous Trump administration and new policies that are being proposed, is that we might see a more narrow definition in terms of who's eligible for H-1Bs. So what we saw under the first Trump administration is that they really tried to only approve H-1Bs for what they thought were the most skilled or highest paid workers. Right now, there's a lot of leniencies in terms of the types of occupations that people could be in order to be eligible for an H-1B. So what we can see under a Trump administration is a more narrow approach to really only limited H-1Bs to those populations. We also will likely see, like Catherine mentioned, a lot of scrutiny on the different applications. So we might see that they might require a lot more evidence to show that you are eligible for an H-1B. And oftentimes they will also try to request more evidence after you submit an application. Before they approve your application, you'll likely get a notice saying that you need to submit more evidence. So just all sorts of ways to slow down the process and really create backlogs to prolong the time in which it takes for someone to obtain an H-1B. And obviously, yeah, we will likely see a lot higher denial rates as well. Next slide, please. Luckily for the D3 waiver policy that I mentioned, likely it will continue. We'll see what happens, but unlike parole in place, the other policy announcement that I mentioned, where it's currently being litigated, this one is kind of flying under the radar. So it could be that because it's more technical and it hasn't received a lot of public exposure, it could be that we will still likely have this policy in place. That being said, because it will require folks to travel abroad to obtain their H-1B and their D3 waiver, we will definitely highly recommend people to, especially if they have DACA and are able to obtain advanced parole, to do that as a safety net in case their waiver is denied. They can come back and still be on DACA. Next slide, please. With green cards, I think like with other options, we might just see increased in processing times, slow down. I think someone had a question about adjustment of statuses with family-based petitions, whether the time will take longer in order for you to get an interview and ultimately be approved. I think it will be the same for employment-based green cards, where there will be an increase in terms of waiting and backlogs. I think with PERM, the labor certification requirement, there could be more requirements to do a lot more advertisement and a lot more to to have employers engage in more efforts to try to recruit U.S. workers. So just the many ways and trying to limit who gets these kinds of green cards. Next slide, please. For an H-1B, I think I also wanted to mention under Harris administration, there could be possibilities, and currently we're actually engaging in advocacy to expand H-1B, so that one of the things that we're looking for is for the government to pass the modernization rule that would, one, allow more occupations to be eligible for an H-1B, and then also to make it easier for nonprofits and government agencies to just apply for the H-1B without needing to go through the lottery system. Next slide, please. For H-1B, so for H-1B, the last thing I wanted to mention was right now we are also advocating so that it's easier for folks who do travel on advance parole to get their H-1B, so that the government clarifies from the consulate side that the person doesn't need a D3 waiver. So if they travel on advance parole to get their H-1B, even if they technically are in need of a waiver, that they make it clear that traveling on advance parole would not require that waiver. So it just makes it easy for folks to then come back and apply for a green card right away through an employer. So that's an advocacy that we're engaging in, and hopefully if we have a Harris administration, they can also clarify that for us. Okay, and then lastly, next slide, please. Just wanted to let you all know that we are here to provide consults to DACA recipients and employers who are living in the Bay Area. Unfortunately, right now our grant is limited to just serving this population, but we're here to assess whether you're eligible for one of these employment-based options. So get a consultation. You can go to pathtopapers.org to sign up for one if you're interested. Next slide, please. And I think you could just skip to the next, since we're running short on time. I am just gonna pass it to Rocio, who will lead us in describing our support.
Krishna, I do think it's very exciting, though, to say that Path to Papers has done about 600 consults and found out that over 60% of the folks that they have screened have been eligible for an immediate remedy. About 49% of those people are actually eligible for an employment-based remedy. So there's quite a lot of promise in these remedies with the DACA population because of DACA folks' employment history. So it's really exciting, the types of impact we're seeing here.
Thank you all. Thank you, Krishna. Thank you, Kathy. Hi, everyone. And if we can go to the Immigrants Rising slide. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Rocio Preciado, and I'm the Career Pathways Innovation Specialist at Immigrants Rising. And under Immigrants Rising, we empower undocumented people to achieve their educational and career goals through personal, institutional, and policy transformation. And just to give you a little bit of background, I was formerly undocumented. And even though I met the eligibility to apply for DACA back in 2012, I did not apply to DACA because I did receive an immigration screening, and I actually found out that I was eligible for a permanent legal solution. But due to timing delays, which Krishna kind of mentioned that can happen, and you might come across a lot of people who might experience that, I did graduate from UC Santa Cruz without work authorization. And that did encourage me to find alternative options to use my skills and my knowledge to generate income at the time. I did have the opportunity to apply to a career program at Immigrants Rising right after graduating from UC Santa Cruz, which really opened up the opportunities for me to learn about networking along with additional resources to be able to generate income and learn more about entrepreneurship. And if you can go to the next section. At Immigrants Rising, one of the things that we have is a list of scholarships and fellowships. Now, one of the reasons why we want to highlight this is because approximately 53% of college graduates are unemployed or are working in a job that doesn't require a bachelor's degree. And it does take an average of 3 to 6 months for a college graduate to secure employment after graduation. Now, I'm just sharing this to put this into perspective and for you to think about. Can you imagine what that might look like for undocumented students that are attending universities and college institutions? And so if you are a student here listening to this webinar or a recent graduate, I want to encourage you to check out Immigrants Rising list of scholarships and fellowships to be able to start connecting with additional career opportunities to expand your network. And if you're an educator working with students, please do share this resource, since it is going to be a great entry point to be able to expand that network of current college students and prepare them for college graduation. We can go to the next slide. In addition to our list of scholarships and fellowships, there are other organizations that are focusing their efforts in making sure that folks are able to have that experiential experience in expand their career opportunities, such as Dream Summer. So we're going to be sharing these slides where you can link and explore some of this programming that exists for folks independent of immigration status, as well as programs like Dream SF, the Dream SF Fellowship Program. Now, if you are an educator, and you might be thinking about what are some of the potential options for people within your institution, people that you're currently working with, we do want to encourage you to begin to think about creating fellowship programs. Now, there are ways in which people are able to get that hands-on experience, being able to get access to a broader network of other entrepreneurs, and being able to get people to a place in which they're able to feel confident in pursuing their careers. As you heard earlier, there are potential opportunities for people to be able to look into employment-based visas, which might require people being exposed to certain experience and to certain skills. We do have a list of resources available for educators and for institutions to help you think about how you can begin to create fellowship programming. Some of those resources include a detailed guide on how to go about this process, sample fellowship announcements, and draft fellowship agreements that you can tap into, as well as a webinar that can walk you through that process. Next slide. In addition to those resources, we also have linked resources to the Higher Ed Immigration Portal, which has additional resources around fellowships and other non-employment-based opportunities for undocumented students, as well as additional research that can help you assess what is the ideal career programming model that you can implement in your institution based on whether you are a college or university or a nonprofit organization. And so again, these resources are going to be linked in the presentation slides. Now, one of the biggest questions, at least for me when I was graduating college, was what are the opportunities available for me to be able to generate income? And so I did get to learn about entrepreneurship and independent contracting. Now, you might be wondering why or how is this possible for folks regardless of immigration status? And so IRCA, the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, states that it is illegal to knowingly employ unauthorized workers in the United States. And it does require employers to verify that every new employee is legally authorized to work in the United States through the I-9 system. Now, there is an exception where the I-9 is not required for independent contractors or business owners, which means that independent contractors or business owners may be able to utilize an I-10 or an EIN to legally earn a living in the United States as long as they pay taxes. And so instead of filling out a form I-9, they will complete the W-9 form, which means that engaging in entrepreneurship may be advantageous to undocumented individuals who are able to adjust their status. Now, this not only has it become a benefit and an opportunity for immigrants in the United States, but also has led to the contribution and the big financial contribution to this country. And so over 800,000 undocumented entrepreneurs were reported as of 2018, and 8% of working age undocumented immigrants were actually entrepreneurs as of 2018, leading to a contribution of $15.2 billion in business income as of 2016. And this really highlights and speaks to the big contributions and talents of the immigrant community, the undocumented community, and the importance as to why expanding additional resources, opportunities, and retaining talent is so important. And with that, we also have inspirational stories and people who have paved the way. We have a lot of folks within our community who have walked the walk, who have launched businesses and who have demonstrated what it's actually been like to be able to pursue entrepreneurship and go outside of our comfort zone. As you can see, we are going to be sharing additional stories of folks who have gone through the process of entrepreneurship independent of their immigration status. If you are an educator or if you are a student, I would highly encourage you to look into those stories and to be able to tap into a network of other entrepreneurs who might be able to share with you some of their learning lessons, some of the resources to be able to support you navigate through that process. And for additional resources, if you want to get started on the process of looking into what it might look like for you to launch a business or to look into entrepreneurship, we do have additional resources around 5 tips to get started as an independent contractor, where we outline what does it mean to be an independent contractor or freelancer, what does it take, and what are some of the resources that you can utilize to be able to get that process started, as well as some basic facts about entrepreneurship. If you are an educator, this is definitely a resource that you would like to, that you might want to share with your students earlier on to begin to tap into some of the entrepreneurial mindset that will be necessary for students as they explore their different options. Now, one of the things that's important to point out is that this process, and regardless of whether someone is eligible for a long-term immigration remedy, whether someone is able to benefit from some of the policies that we've mentioned in this webinar or not, the journey and the pathway is not easy. I know sometimes with a lot of information and many different opinions or many different options, it can feel confusing. And sometimes it might even feel isolating to be able to go through a process where sometimes we might feel like we're the only ones who understand. Which is why at Immigrants Rising, we have a list of mental health related resources that you can tap into or that you can refer your students to. One of those resources is our mental health connector. This one is available for folks in California over the age of 18, and applications are now open. We also have our national wellness support groups. These are available for adults in the United States. These are non-clinical wellness support groups, and they will be beginning the week of October 14th and are also now open. And we also have a very special group that it's new this year, and that is our wellness support groups for people pursuing legislation. This one is available for folks who are in the Bay Area who are considering adjusting their status, and the application is also open, and the groups will also be starting the week of October 14th. And if you are listening to us from a different state, from outside of California, and would like to find additional mental health resources in your state or in your region, you can check out our national California-based list of resources in which you can identify different resources based on your particular needs, as well as based on your particular region. And one of the things that I would like to close with is really highlighting the importance of connecting to that network and those people who can give us a lot of that information and that resources that we need. And so many times it is not what we know, it is who we know. And we hope that through this webinar, you were able to connect to a large group of people who can walk you through the process of identifying additional resources beyond this webinar. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pass it on to Kathy.
Thank you so much, Rocio. Thank you so much to everyone for so much information, expertise, insight into these complex issues. We just covered so many different forms of law all at once that I'm sure many people's minds are spinning. As we've said before, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar. We will also be sharing the slide deck, and we will be sharing resources in a follow-up email that will land in your inbox from me, Catherine Jin, by the end of the week. I do want to highlight some of the resources that have just been shared. Stephanie, could you go to the next slide? From the Path to Papers team, they wanted to make sure that folks saw this practice advisory. So for those who don't know, practice advisories are generally written for attorneys. So this is a practice advisory on employment-based immigration visas for DACA recipients. So this is a great resource. If you do not live in the Bay Area and you really want to learn more about an employment-based options and you want to go talk to an attorney about this, and they might say, I don't know anything about this, or I don't think you can do this, this is a great practice advisory to have to bring to that attorney and share with them so they can get up to speed on some of the things that the Path to Papers team is are experts on and know a lot about. This next one from Forward.us is an advisory for employers. So if you're someone like Luis, who's been chatting with us, and you have an employer who doesn't know that much about sponsorship, or you're trying to convince your employer to sponsor you, your DACA recipient, you're trying to convince them, this is a guide for employers that will talk more about sponsorship and why this is something that would be advantageous to do with your DACA employees. And finally, the Path to Papers website has all these resources that I just mentioned, and is also a place where you can sign up for a consult if you live in the San Francisco Bay Area, or again, you can take information from them to share with other attorneys and other folks. And then all of the resources that Rocio just shared are available on the Immigrants Rising website there. So again, lots of information. We will try our best to share. This is probably the tip of the iceberg of like what everyone can share about all these topics. So we encourage you to stay in touch, ask questions. There's no dumb question when you're asking about this. I have been trying to learn about this for years and still get confused every day about something. So please don't be afraid to reach out and ask away. And I'm going to let now Danae close us out here.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and thank you all so much for joining us for this entire webinar. You could have been absolutely anywhere else on this Wednesday afternoon, so thank you so much for deciding to stay with us as we engaged in this conversation. And I don't know about you, but I'm feeling absolutely empowered and uplifted, seeing how many people came to participate in this space. So thank you for that. And I know we're talking about like the best case scenario and worst case scenario. And the part that I want to talk about is just our community and our ability to thrive. We've lived in a pre-DACA world. We've lived in a pre-Dreamer world. And basically that just goes to show that no matter what circumstances and what hand that our community is dealt, that we've always found a way in lieu of the circumstances, in lieu of the administration that's in a position of power to really change our lives, that we've been able to show up and show out, right? right? Like Lin-Manuel Miranda always says, immigrants, we get the job done, like Hamilton. And I just want you all to leave with that. And I hope the resources that you learned about during this webinar can be something that is applicable, not just to your day-to-day life, but really that you could pass it on to someone else. And what I loved about the scenario planning and the resources that both Stephen and Catherine shared out is they also provided you with an opportunity to continue afterward for consultation. Use your resources, right? I kid you not, it's the resources and the networks that I've made in this immigrant community that has allowed me to continue to be able to thrive even today. So just remember that at the root of all of this, in wake of an election that's coming up, all the uncertainty that we have to face, one thing's for certain, is that our community comes from strong, resilient ancestry. And like members of the Black and Indigenous and Latinx community, our ancestors have been through this and worse. And we too have it in us to be able to thrive and succeed through no matter whatever obstacles are thrown our way. So thank you so much. And I hope you all have an incredible rest of your day.